we going to cool down this row so that we don't end up in a worse situation than we're already in? We know that supplies are going to be slowing down, and we've had Professor Stephen Parris, the National Medical Director for the NHS, issuing this warning to people: get your jab booked in the next couple of days, otherwise you might miss out. Is there a slight panic amongst the government that this is going to get worse before it gets better?
So the government has been very clear that we will make those targets that we set out earlier, that all of those over 50 will be vaccinated in April, and then that all adults by July. So that's really good news. And I think it's also good that the UK and the EU worked together yesterday on a joint statement, coming together to say we want to work with each other to make sure that all countries get access to the vaccine. And so that sort of has calmed down that discussion to make sure that there is that intention to continue to work together.
Are you confident that that then rules out this threatened ban on exports from factories which are in the EU to the UK?
I think it's really important that all countries do work together. You know, clearly the UK vaccination programme has been absolutely incredible. You know, half of all adults already vaccinated.
Well, absolutely, and Vicky Ford, that was part of what the EU said yesterday, wasn't it? That they might decide on what is exported based on how many people in a country are vaccinated. Our success still puts us at risk of that export ban. The question is, have you ruled that out?
So I think it's really, really helpful that both the UK and the EU worked together yesterday on that joint statement, saying they want to work together to make sure that there is that reciprocity and making sure that the vaccine continues to flow across borders. That is so important, and that is what we'll all continue to work towards.
Vicky Ford, I mean, to use the Prime Minister's words, have we been a bit greedy, do you think, when it's come to our vaccine programme compared to European countries?
You know, the UK and the UK government working together with the private sector on those who were developing the vaccines. You know, we did amazing work. The government took that risk very early on to place those orders and to back those vaccines that we thought were most likely to be successful. The MRHA did that very, very thorough but quick review to make sure that they could approve the vaccines. And that has meant that we've had an extremely successful vaccine rollout. Now we're supporting also vaccines going off to poorer parts of the world through the Garraway programme, and that is really exceptional too. You know, we need to all work on this together, and I hope that the joint statement that came out of the EU and the UK yesterday has calmed down some of the tensions there.
Would you accept a policy that says, let's say, prioritises vulnerable people across the whole of Europe and other parts of the world, more so than the rest of our wider population, and that should be the priority from all vaccination factories where these vaccines are coming out of, that actually send it to countries that still haven't had the vast majority of the elderly and the vulnerable people vaccinated? Fortunately, we are in a better situation here.
So the government has been very, very clear that in the UK we want to hit that target to make sure that all adults are vaccinated in July, by the end of July, and it's really important that we continue to focus on that, because that is such a key part of our own way out of the lockdown. But it's also
so you're saying all of our adults before vulnerable people in, say, France, Spain, Germany, Italy, whatever, we get all our adults done first, and priority in other countries later.
So different countries have obviously approached this in a different way. What has been absolutely so impressive in the UK is how many people want to have the vaccine. And we all recognise in this country that having the vaccine is not just about protecting one's own self, it's also about protecting one's friends, one's neighbour, one's community. And that is why it's so important that we continue to have the vaccine going as widely as possible, because that's how it would protect not only our own selves, but more vulnerable people as well.
Yesterday, Boris Johnson told MPs that he thinks that landlords should be able to decide if customers need to be vaccinated before they're able to use pubs. Does that mean that as a government, you are backing vaccine passports for our hospitality industry?
So as the government, we've obviously announced that very detailed roadmap to show us the way out of lockdown, and we announced that last month. And that's, for example, why our schools were the first stage to reopen, and then we hope to see more reopening after Easter, depending obviously on the data that we said we'd check at each time. And as part of that roadmap, we did announce that there would be a review of certifications, whether or not that's a certificate that you have for a vaccine or a certificate that you've recently had a negative test for COVID. And that was all part of the roadmap. That review, there's lots and lots of difficult questions there, the ethical questions on certification, but that review will be happening before June, before that final phase 4 of the relaxation from lockdown. So I think it's absolutely right, and the Prime Minister himself has been the person who's commissioned that review to happen.
Yeah, but he's given a pretty strong indication that a sort of green vaccine passport would be something that would be necessary before you go to a pub, but that it would be down to individual landlords. So if it's something you back, why wouldn't it apply to all pubs? Why would you leave that up to individuals to decide?
So as I've said, he's announced that there will be a full review. I believe it's Michael Gove will be leading that review from the Cabinet Office to look at all of these different questions that you're asking. But I won't get ahead of that review or the Prime Minister's oversight of that review as well. Okay. Every decision at this stage needs to be backed by the evidence and looking at some of those very difficult questions as well. But I think we should let them do that detailed review before I come.
But I think this is quite important. But let's imagine that this does come into play, that we do have a vaccination certificate. Are you saying, as Children's Minister, that it'll be OK for children and families not to go to pubs, restaurants, theatres and cinemas, despite everything we've talked about in terms of their mental health issues and the fact that they're desperate to go out and be families again? You're saying that if we have a vaccination certificate, you will back the plan despite the effect it could have on families and children up until towards the end of the year. It might not be November, December until children might be vaccinated. That's dependent on getting a decent supply. So you're saying that's OK?
No, so what I'm saying is, of course, everybody wants to get back to normal as quickly as possible. We're having the most amazing vaccination program in this country, which is, by way ahead of any other country, because so many people are coming forward, which is great. And we've got so many volunteers and staff working in our vaccination centres. And the government has said it will do this review and look at all those difficult questions that you're asking there. And I shouldn't get ahead of looking at that review. We need to look at all of those questions as well.
All right. As Minister for Children and Families, you have a heavy responsibility as we come out of this lockdown, of course, because more children have been pushed into poverty. Over the course of the lockdown, there's been a rise in food bank use. It took a footballer, Marcus Rashford, to force the government to extend free school meals. And of course, there is a massive gap now in educational attainment because of the issues around homeschooling, not being able to get online devices, for instance, out to those, who need them despite best efforts. How on earth are you going to make sure that there is not a generation of children left behind?
So firstly, absolutely, the focus on vulnerable children has been completely my focus throughout this whole year of this pandemic. I'm incredibly proud that we were one of the few countries in the world that kept schools open for vulnerable children right throughout this pandemic. We've actually extended free school meals to more groups of children than any government in the past 50 years. So that has been a really important part of the support, and also putting in that extra support to families who need help with food or supplies through the COVID Winter Grant Scheme. In terms of educational catch-up, I mean, one of the things that's been really, really great over the past decade is that what we call the attainment gap, the gap between educational outcomes for children from poorer backgrounds versus their better off peers, that has narrowed at every stage of education over the past decade. We've also been really focusing.
Lockdown has thrown that into disarray, though, hasn't it? I mean, I don't think we can talk about that without saying lockdown has had a devastating effect.
Lockdown has had a really challenging impact. We know that, for example, the early years are the most important stages of a child's development, and that's the key reason why we kept nurseries and preschools open even during the last lockdown. We've obviously distributed over 1.2 million laptops and devices to children from disadvantaged backgrounds, but also to other groups of disadvantaged young people, such as care leavers. Then we've also investing in the catch-up programme and the recovery programme. That's on top of the record funding that's gone into schools. There's another 1.7 billion pounds there.
I mean, obviously, there's a lot of work underway. There's a lot of work to be done. Can I just ask, though, for the sort of outstanding theme has been, why did it take a footballer to make you extend that free school meals? Why was that? Why did that have to happen? Why is it the work of Marcus Rashford that made that happen?
It isn't actually, Susanna. I had extended the free school meals to more groups of children right at the beginning of this lockdown and the eligibility for free school meals, and set up at a very, very challenging, very, very early on that national voucher.
Are you saying that the work of Marcus Rashford was irrelevant?
Absolutely. Hugely respect Marcus and the campaign that he's been doing, and we've been putting extra support in through the whole period. But this has been, and he's been very supportive of the work that we've been doing to extend that COVID winter support grant, which will continue to support children and families through this Easter holidays. And then obviously the other thing that I've been working on and had started on way early on was the holiday activities and food programme, which we ran in pilot projects for the past 3 years, and is now going to be.
So, Vicky, I just need to clarify this, because people at home, I'm sure, will be screaming at the telly here. Are you saying that you would have been doing this anyway, and regardless of what Marcus Rashford did and the call with the Prime Minister, twice he had to intervene? Are you saying he was wasting his time? You were doing it already? Surely not. You're not saying that, are you?
For example, the holiday activities and food programme, we've been piloting for the past 3 years, and we had a manifesto commitment to increase that childcare element, a £1 billion manifesto commitment to the last general election. And as part of that, we're now rolling out that holiday activities and food scheme all across the country in the holidays this year. So yes, there were projects that we were already working on, and I'm very glad for the work that Marcus has done to make sure that we've been focusing on.
We could talk about it a great deal, but I think you mentioned piloting, but certainly not of the grand scale that was required, which needed people like Marcus Rashford to intervene. And I cannot believe you were here on national telly this morning and saying that Marcus didn't have the impact we all were led to believe.
Can I just point out, you voted against free school meals?
No, I voted against the voucher system being done by schools in the holidays, because there were other ways we were putting support in, for example, through the COVID winter grant scheme. And that's really important that, when schools are closed... OK,
so when Labour brought the motion for free school meals in the October half-term break, you were one of 320 Conservative MPs who voted against it.
Because we had put in support elsewhere, and we've continued to do that through the COVID winter grant scheme.
You voted against the free school. It took Marcus Rashford to work on this to make it happen. When there was a vote in Parliament, you voted against it.
Marcus has done some really super work in this period, but I have extended free school meals to more groups of children than any government in the past 50 years. We are rolling out our holiday activities and food scheme across the whole country, which was a manifesto commitment to increase childcare around holidays and wraparound childcare. We've been piloting that for 3 years to make sure that when it does go live, that it works well. And those are projects that are really, really important, and which indeed Marcus himself supports. So it's great to have his support on these projects. OK,
and it took Marcus Rashford posting those pictures of the boxes to change policy on vouchers as well. So, I think let's not undermine what Marcus Rashford...
We had changed the policy. We had introduced the voucher scheme and done the top-up funding. And as soon as schools were asked to close to most pupils in this lockdown. It did take some time, and there were some shocking pictures of a few lunch boxes, but the vast majority
It wasn't a few.
Has worked well.
Vicky,
Okay, it has worked.
Vicky, it wasn't a few. And I think what you're talking about is that you spent time talking about piloting and strategies, and we had all this in place, but people were looking for action. And in the end, it took Marcus Rashford for you to really pull your sleeves up and do something about it. And I think that's what happened. And it was people across social media posting their boxes, which just shocked the nation. And I think it's really disingenuous for you to come on here and try to take credit for it when it took the nation and Marcus Rashford to lead this.
So, Adil, actually, those boxes were completely shocking. They did not meet the school food standards. We called it out immediately. We set up a hotline in the DFE for anyone to come and complain about a lunchbox that was below the standards. And in that first week, we had less than 10 complaints, all of which were dealt with, and the standards in the schools were immediately improved. There is no space. Children must not go hungry. I've made that very, very clear throughout this pandemic. And wherever we have had issues across the country, we have been extremely quick to address them. Indeed, I met school caterers only yesterday to make sure that as children are getting back into school, to make sure that they get those healthy, nutritious and hot meals that they all need.
All right. Vicky Ford, Children's Minister, thanks very much indeed for joining us this morning.